All right, we're going to do a quick little review of the outermost wrinkly portion of the brain called the cerebral cortex. We're going to start with the blue portion, and just as a heads up, on the exam, if you do have to label things, I cannot guarantee that they're going to be these colors, so just keep that in mind. This portion right up front is the Anybody got it? It is the frontal lobe. And then below the frontal lobe, kind of where your ears are located, this lobe is called the temporal lobe. Right behind that, this red portion in the very back of the brain, we call that the occipital lobe. And then on the top, kind of on the back-ish side, but on the top definitely, we call this one the parietal lobe. You can say that one a couple times. Parietal lobe. We're going to look at the two wrinkles that are on either side of our frontal and parietal lobes. We're going to start with the one on the parietal lobe this time. The parietal lobe wrinkle. What do we call that one? This is the somatosensory cortex. And then right here on the frontal lobe portion, we call this wrinkle the motor cortex. Awesome. Okay, I hope that went well. If not, go back to the other lecture, go through those again. But we are going to move on to the inner portion of the brain. And we are going to start with the limbic system. The limbic system is this innermost portion of the brain made up of lots of different structures that we're going to talk about. And when we're done with the limbic system, we will talk about the brainstem. The brainstem is this bottom portion, kind of looks like a leaf and a stick. So we'll talk about the brainstem after the limbic system. So limbic system first is made up of the hippocampus, the amygdala, the basal ganglia, the thalamus, and the hypothalamus. And all of these, again, are located in this central portion of the brain, so like the inner portion of the brain. All right, so with the limbic system, we are going to start with the hippocampus. The hippocampus is this purple structure. It looks kind of like a green bean pod or an edamame pod. If you've ever had edamame, it's so good. This green bean pod is called the hippocampus. And the hippocampus helps us with memory. Weird ways to remember. I'm going to give you some different weird ways to remember these because this is psychology biology and mnemonics are really good. So the hippocampus, if there was a hippo on campus eating green beans, you would remember it. Memory. Is it weird? Yes. Is it going to help you remember? I don't know. Hopefully, weird ways tend to stick in our brains better than just normal boring things. So, hippocampus, hippo on campus, eating green beans, memory. All right, moving on. The amygdala is next, and the amygdala is right in front of that green bean structure. It is circular in shape. Some people call it a cherry. I like to call it a bouncy ball. Remember those little bouncy balls made of rubber that you threw around as a kid and they would bounce all over the place? That's what it reminds me of. And so that is the amygdala. The amygdala, I always nickname the amygdala Amy G. Dalla, like a name. Amy G. Dalla is her name. And maybe Amy G. likes to play with bouncy balls. I don't know. We're not quite sure on that. But the weird way to remember this. So Amy's a G and she likes her dollar bills, y'all. And her dollar bills make her super happy. And Amy is in charge of emotion because apparently money and bouncy balls make Amy super happy. So amygdala is in charge of emotion. If you don't like these, don't use them. But some of you are going to sit at the test and you're going to be like, Amy G. Dalla. Now what is Amy? Oh. So use them if you like them. Don't if you don't. The basal ganglia is up next, and this is going to start with the bouncy ball, which is very beloved by Amy G. Dalla. So here's our bouncy ball, Amy G. And then here is the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia, I always call it a seashell. It looks like a seashell to me. And then the hippocampus, you cannot see in this image, but the hippocampus is going to be behind the basal ganglia. So you cannot see it, but that's where it would be in relation to the basal ganglia and the amygdala. All right, basal ganglia, it is a number of different structures. We're just going to refer to it as this seashell structure here, and it coordinates gross motor activity. So gross motor activity meaning things that require lots of large muscle groups. So walking. Walking requires toes and feet and calves and thighs and your core muscle and your upper body and your arms, right? It requires lots of different portions of your body to coordinate this movement and balance of walking or running or jumping. Any of these large movements is what the basal ganglia is going to help us with. So if you think about seashells, sometimes when you pick up a seashell, it's kind of gross, like it has sand all over it, and it's ew. And it smells sometimes, especially if you put it in a plastic bag. Don't do that. So if you can remember, the seashell is kind of gross motor activity, and the official name is the basal ganglia. Oh, we need to talk about the thalamus next. The thalamus is right in the middle. If we were to take the brain and we were to slice it between the right and the left hemisphere, you would have a thalamus on the right side and one on the left side. So we have a right and a left thalamus. I always call these eggs. They always look like two brown golden eggs that are kind of smushed together. So that is our thalamus. And then here you can see the right and the left thalamus. The thalamus is considered a way station for sensory information. So we're going to pause for just a moment, and I'm going to ask you to go back to Thomas the Train. If you did Thomas the Train as a kiddo, we're going to bring him back into your life. Okay, so Thomas the Train came into the station, and at some point he hit a way station, and the way station is going to turn him in the direction that he needs to go. Either he needs to go to, gosh, what is it called? The building. There's a name for it. The station. And he's going to go in there and he's going to take a little nap. Or we're going to turn him around and we're going to give him, I don't know, diesel or coal or whatever he runs off of. I don't remember. Or we're going to turn him around and we're going to send him on his way down the tracks. That is what the thalamus does. The thalamus is going to bring in our sensory information, or the sensory information is going to come to the thalamus. Your thalamus is then going to direct it where it needs to go. So if something visual comes into the thalamus is going to send it to the visual portion of the brain. And the same with hearing and tasting and touch. Smell does not go through the thalamus, and we'll talk about that when we get to sensation and perception, but smell is the only sense that does not come through the thalamus. Okay, so the thalamus is, you can picture him as a train if you wish, like Thomas the Thalamus is going to come into the way station and then be sent off to the direction it needs to go. Below the thalamus is the hypothalamus. You can't see it very well in this image, so we are going to shift images. The thalamus is right here. And the thalamus is usually the easiest thing to find in this particular cut of the brain. So if you have this cut of the brain, the thalamus is usually the easiest. It's right in the middle. It's the center. It's the target. Go for the thalamus. Right below the thalamus, this triangular shaped area is called the hypothalamus. Hypo means under or below. So hypo, below, thalamus. Isn't that nice? So the hypothalamus is below the thalamus. If we zoom in on this little triangular area here, There are a number of different areas that make up this hypothalamus. We're not concerned about that. We're just going to call this whole triangular area the hypothalamus. Now, the hypothalamus controls the 4 F's: fleeting, fighting, feeding, and mating. I censored that one for you. So you can look at that. You can figure out, how does mating turn into an F? I'll let you figure that out. If not, ask your neighbor or your significant other, see if they can help you out there. But fleeting, as in like running away, fighting, feeding, and then mating. All right, so that is the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, again, below thalamus. I don't have a great mnemonic for this one that is appropriate, because I feel like anything I come up with is going to be in the direction of the 4 F's, and that might not be good. So you're going to come up with your own on that one, the hypothalamus and the 4 F's. The hypothalamus also controls the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland is right below the hypothalamus. The pituitary gland, its job is to secrete hormones so that you can get that hormone release into your body. If we go up here again, the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the pituitary gland, those are the 3 easiest things to label when you look at a brain image. So thalamus, hypothalamus, pituitary gland. I always call the pituitary gland the little Italy of the brain. It kind of hangs out. You know how Italy hangs out in its body of water down there? That's how I see the pituitary gland. It's just hanging out, not in a body of water, but it's hanging out in your brain. And so there's the pituitary gland, which secretes hormones. All right, let's kind of put everything together here. Here is, again, we are slicing the brain, right hemisphere versus left hemisphere. The easiest place to start with the brain is right in the middle, the target, which kind of looks like an egg, and this we call the thalamus. Below the thalamus, we have the hypothalamus, and below that, we have the pituitary gland. The pineal body, I know you see that hanging out there. We're not going to label that. If you know it, that's awesome. You don't get points for it. So that's those 3 structures right there. I want to point out right here, this is the corpus callosum. This is a band of neural fibers, and it connects the right and left hemisphere. Now you can kind of see it right here, but what I want you to picture is if you had a full brain and you have the right and left in either hand, and you kind of pull the right and left apart a little bit. If you do that, then you're going to be able to see this corpus callosum. It's going to bridge between the 2 hemispheres. So if you can imagine looking down on the brain, sometimes that's a little bit easier to see this structure. Okay, that's the corpus callosum. We could also label the frontal lobe. We could label the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, the temporal lobe. And then we're going to move on to this back portion of the brain called the brain stem. So here, I'm going to pop these up. You can pause. Oop, you can pause it if you want to see those. But we're going to move into the brainstem. That is, on this image, it looks like a leaf and a stick. The brainstem is made up of the cerebellum, the reticular formation, and the medulla. On an exam, if you are labeling the brain, there will never be a line for brainstem, because brainstem is the whole collection of cerebellum, reticular formation, and medulla. It's all 3 of them. So if you see lines and you have to label, it's probably going to be cerebellum, reticular formation, or medulla, not brainstem. Hint, hint, hint. All right, so let's dive into these 3. The brainstem is known as the primitive brain or the little brain. Gosh, there was another name. My kids. Nope, can't think of it. I'll see if I can think of it. The brainstem. We're going to start with the cerebellum. The cerebellum is this portion in the back. It sometimes looks like an onion. It sometimes looks like broccoli, depending upon the cut and the image that you're looking at. So cerebellum is an onion or broccoli. And this is in charge of fine motor movements. So before we talked about gross motor movement, this is fine motor movement. This is what surgeons have, where you make very small, intricate, tiny movements, and you can coordinate your fingers to do so. Okay, that is fine motor movement. Sometimes you see this with painting. If you're painting something really, really small, that is your cerebellum at work. There are other body areas that can do fine movement, but we tend to think of our fingers the most when it comes to fine motor movement. So cerebellum, hanging out there, onion or broccoli. The reticular formation. The reticular formation is in charge of sleep and arousal. Now, arousal, we're not talking about the 4 F's here. This arousal is the waking up. So helping you fall asleep, helping you wake up, that is the reticular formation. Okay, reticular formation connects this structure. What are these structures again? Anybody know what these are? These are the thalamus. So here's the thalamus. And the reticular formation is going to be right here. It's going to connect the thalamus to, down here is going to be the spinal cord. You can't see the spinal cord right on this image, but it would be right down here. So the reticular formation is on the inside. It's covered up by this purple structure and this blue structure, which we will name in a second. So the reticular formation is on the inside, connecting the thalamus to the spinal cord. Helps with sleep and arousal. And last but not least, we have the medulla. The medulla helps us with vital functions such as heart rate and breathing. So the medulla is right here. It covers over the reticular formation. If we look at this image, the medulla is at the bottom down here. It is considered the base of the brainstem, so the very bottom of the brainstem. That is your medulla, heart rate and breathing. And last but not least, this tends to not be on the exam, but everybody wants to talk about the pons. So let's just point it out really quick. The pons is this portion right here. It's purple in this particular image. And this, again, is covering over the reticular formation. And it's between the thalamus and the medulla. Okay, so this is the pons right here, and up in this image, it's right there. I tend to not put this on the exam, hint, hint, nudge, nudge. However, there it is for those of you who know that term and you just want to figure out where is the pons. All right, here's the brain. We flipped it over, so we're looking at the underside of the brain. We're going to start back here. The onions are the cerebellum. This is the cerebellum. If we look right here, the base, what is this base structure called? This is the medulla. This is not worth points, but everybody likes to label it as the pons. Inside of this structure is going to be 2 different pieces. They run from the spinal cord to a structure in here, and that is called the reticular formation. The thalamus you cannot see. It is back underneath there. And then the hypothalamus you also cannot see, but it's going to be back under there. And then right here in the center, this is going to be your pituitary gland. If we look at the lobes, the lobe right in the front here is the, very conveniently, frontal lobe. And then on the bottom here, be careful. Again, we're looking at the brain upside down. This is going to be the temporal lobe. Okay, the parietal lobe is going to be on the opposite side. We can't see it from this view. This is our temporal lobe. Okay, mammillary body, we don't need to know that. It's there if you would like to see it. And that, oh, spinal cord and medulla. I missed that one. Okay, that is it for right now.